Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a review. This one is for a game called Fertility from Catch Up Games. This is going to be an Essen release, but we were lucky enough to get our hands on a copy for this review. It's a 2 to 4 player tile placement game, but you're also going to be collecting a lot of resources from those tiles to score a ton of points.
So the idea behind the name Fertility actually speaks to the land in Egypt. We're each trying to use the fertile land to grow one of 4 different types of resources. You have alabaster, you have papyrus, you have bovine, and then you have grapes. All of these are going to be placed onto your main metropolis board in order to gather some kind of benefit at the end of the game. Each player is going to start with one of these metropolis boards. There are 2 districts that are pre-printed on the board itself. Also, you're going to have places to place additional districts through the course of the game. We'll talk about the district tiles in just a moment. And then across the very bottom, you're going to have the 3 in-game scoring conditions. You have wheat in your warehouse. You have the monuments. Whoever has the most monuments on the board is going to get victory points. And then you're going to score for the diversity of the different god statues that you build within your district itself. The board itself is comprised of a modular board system, and you're going to use as many of these as the number of players that are participating in the game. In this case, we have a 3-player game set up.
Yeah, it's a really cool variable setup. Like Jeremy said, there's different modular boards to choose from. There's 4 in total, so you're going to have a completely different setup almost every time you play.
Yeah, when you look at the board itself, it's going to be broken into different areas, so to speak. There's 1 starting tile that's going to be placed near the center of the board. Each of these is going to have their own starting area. This tile is made up of the 4 different types of resources in the game itself. And then when you're looking at the board itself, there are some pre-printed resources on the game. Let's explain how to get those. There are lakes which you cannot build over. You cannot build over other players' tiles in the game. You cannot build over any of the wheat fields in the game. And of course, you can't hang off the edges of the board when you place your tiles.
Exactly. In addition to the main board, you're going to have these district tiles here. These are going to be something that you add to your metropolis throughout the game, and it's going to give you some opportunities to score some points, to get some immediate rewards, or to set some other things up for end of game scoring.
And then there are the valley tiles. These are what you're actually going to be placing onto the main board itself. They're broken into 2 different types of resources. They could be the same resource, or they could be different resources. The idea is that you want to place these onto the main board in order to gain more resources, and there are specific rules on how you place these through the course of the game. The final component are the monuments. We'll explain how these get built through the course of the game. To start the game, each player is going to collect their 4 monuments. Each player is going to get 3 random valley tiles placed in front of them, and then you're going to place your wheat marker on the 0 space of your wheat track. Then you're simply going to play a tile. There's 3 things you can do on your turn. The first thing is mandatory, and that's placing one of the valley tiles onto the board.
Yeah, when you place a valley tile, you're going to have to place them, like we mentioned, so that at least one side of the tile is adjacent to another tile on the board that has that same resource. So for instance, I could place right here. Now, we're going to tell you a number of different things that's going to happen here, but the main thing, like I said, is going to happen. I placed this so the papyrus is matching up here, so I would get 1 papyrus. You'll note here too, my grape is matching to this grape, so I would also get a grape. As we mentioned earlier, if you cover up some of these spaces on the board, you'll also get one of those resources. And it doesn't matter how you cover that up or with what kind of tile, but you're going to get that resource as well. So you can chain a few of these things together.
Yeah, one of the other, or 2 of the other main rules on placing these tiles, if they are placed adjacent to a wheat field, depending on how many sides you place next to, you're going to move up your wheat track. This wheat track is kind of a wild when you're buying new district tiles, or you can just keep those points because they're going to be worth exceeding number of victory points as you go through the course of the game. The other main thing that happens here is there's going to be times in the game where you completely surround an empty space with tiles or the edge of the board or other pre-printed things on the board itself. When that happens, and in this case, we have completely surrounded this empty space on the board. That player that does that has one of 2 options. They can place one of their monuments into that new location, and that will sit there for the rest of the game. There's a majority control at the end of the game for whoever has the most monuments. Instead of doing that, you can decide to not place a monument at that given time and collect any one of the resources in the supply and place it onto your side of the board, just as you would when you place a tile.
Yeah, and we'll get to why those resources are important in a minute. But there are going to be times where you want to look at whether or not the monument's going to help you, or if there's a particular situation on your metropolis where you need a resource.
The second phase that's going to happen during a player's turn is completely optional. It's up to them. They have the ability to buy one of these 4 face-up district tiles. When you look at the district tiles themselves, each of them is going to look primarily the same on the upper right-hand corner. This tells you the cost to buy this particular tile and to place it on your board. These are going to range from 0 to 2. And this is the number of resources that you have to give up from your supply back to the main reserve. When you do that, you get to place this tile on one of the empty spaces on your metropolis board. All of these are going to give you some kind of bonus, either right then or at the end of the game. These bonuses range from straight up victory points. Some of the gods, there's 6 different gods. You want to have those tiles in front of you. There's some that can convert one resource to another resource. There's ones that will move up your wheat marker.
Right.
They all do very different things.
And the interesting thing about it is it's fueled by the next stage. You're going to take all of the resources you've collected, and you may, again, this is optional, although I don't know why you wouldn't want to do this,
Sure.
and place the resources that you collected that turn onto any of the spaces, both in the district tiles you've added to your board and the starting district tile that's basically built into the board. Everyone has one of those. It gives some variable powers right from the beginning. You're going to place things in these locations, and like we said earlier, they're either going to let you do something immediately, set you up from some end of the game scoring, a variety of things. The point is, in that third round where you're using your resources or placing your resources, if you don't have any place to put them, they're going to go back into the general supply. So you don't want to take resources during your turn that you really don't have anywhere to put them.
When you place these onto your metropolis board, they're locked in. They're permanently there for the rest of the game, so they start filling up quickly. So there's times when you're not going to have the right tile to place into the right location. You're going to get resources that you're not going to want to use. So that's when it's important to buy the right kind of district tiles. And basically, once that is done, that's the end of that player's turn. It's going to move to the next player. The player that finished their turn, they're going to pick a new valley tile to add to their 3 existing ones. They're going to refill this district tile back up. Next player's turn, you're going to keep going around and around until end game.
Yeah, and the end of the game is triggered by one thing and one thing only, and that's when you've run out of valley tiles. So when you can't refill the 3 valley tiles from the supply, that's going to trigger the end of the game.
Yep, and you're going to score victory points. Victory points are scored for a variety of different things. The first thing is the most obvious. On several of these tiles, they're simply going to give you victory points if you put the right type of resource on that district board. In this case, this just needs a single grape, and you get 4 victory points when you fill this up. And there's a whole ton of these, either requiring one resource, multiple resources, different resources, same resources, and so forth. The next big one is the multiplier. The multiplier is going to give you points times the number of that particular resource for everything that you have on your board. So in this case, this is going to give me 1 victory point for every bovine. So if I have 8 bovine on my board, including this one, I get 8 victory points.
The next thing you'll find on some of the district tiles are god spaces. When you fulfill one of these spaces, it's going to give you basically a different god typically. Some of the gods are repeated on different tiles, but you want a variety of gods, and you're going to follow this chart at the bottom of your your metropolis board to determine how many points. So for instance, if I had 3 different gods by the end of the game, I'd get 10 points, all the way up to potential 40 points.
The last 2 ways to score victory points are on the bottom of your board. How far you've progressed in the wheat warehouse is how many victory points you're going to gain. Again, this wheat can be used as a wild resource to be able to buy some of these district tiles. And then the final thing is the monuments. You're going to look on the board and see whoever has placed the most monuments. Whoever has the most is going to get 15 points, and whoever is second most is going to score 7 points. That's the game. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, so let's talk about what we thought about it, because we've played a lot of games like this before. I haven't played too many tile placement games that had such a resource engine attached to it, where you're placing these things, getting these resources. I've also not played a lot of games where you get your resources and then they go right away.
I think that's the best part about the game too, is that you have a very small economy that you're constantly recycling, and there's 2 points of decision making that a couple of different points of decision making. One, where to place a tile, but mostly that's pretty evident because you have to build onto pre-existing locations on the board. The 2 most important things that you need to realize is, 1, do I spend those resources that I gain? And they may be anywhere from 1 to 4 or 5 if you're lucky. I mean, if you're really lucky to gain that many resources.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And do I want to expend those resources to buy new district tiles? Because that's what you need in order to gain more points. So you're giving up those resources right away. Number 2 is you have to bite the right things and build the right things at the right time. So you're constantly looking at the valley tiles that I can use, the district tiles I can buy, and what do I need to fulfill in these locations. So, and the fact that those supplies go away if you don't use them. So you're constantly thinking that in the back of your mind. Plus, the other thing you're really trying to think about in this game is how do I place a tile that's not going to set up the next players to be able to do something even better than what I've just done.
That often becomes one of the biggest things and most significant things you think about when you're placing a tile. Because it's often fairly evident, like you said, when you place a tile like, okay, I'm going to place it here because I have a grape engine and I want a couple grapes to do some X, Y, or Z. But if you get too focused on that, and I play a tile, and then you're able to play a tile to give you a monument space.
Yeah,
that's huge. I mean, first place in monuments gets 15 points, second gets 7th, and in a 4-player game, no one else gets anything.
Right.
So you don't want to mess around giving people those opportunities. So it was interesting in the games I played. Everyone tried to avoid that, so there wasn't a lot of big moves, so that it kind of paced the game out for everybody, which, like, on one hand, it was satisfying that it kept everything sort of really interesting. On the other hand, there was no big, massive, like, move. You weren't making one big turn and doing all this stuff. But I think if you could, it would probably upset the balance of the game.
Exactly. I think the one thing that you had mentioned, and I'll go ahead and piggyback off something you had said earlier, outside of doing this review, is that it would have been nice if there was more variety in these tiles, and I kind of feel the same way. All of these tiles are going to reflect the 4 resources, which is fine in and of itself, but if they do make a future expansion for the game, I think it'd be really cool to give people even another point of decision making in the game where it may be a resource and something else, like some other kind of point system where you could add that in and say, that's my point, I put a marker maybe on that tile to do something special for me.
Anything. It just, when you look at all those tiles, before I'd played the first time, I'd assumed maybe there was more variety in the tiles without really knowing the rules of the game. And then once you play, you realize it is just those 4 resources. There are a couple of tiles, I think maybe even 1, maybe 2 of each resource where it's a double tile. And those come up and they're kind of unique.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases, you can't usually place those necessarily because there's oftentimes not a place that has 2 of the same resource right next to each other all the time.
Right. In of itself, though, it's a very simple game, very easy to learn, and actually, it's actually super satisfying being able to place the right tile at the right time and be able to fulfill these boards as you need them to. So I like what it's trying to do. I think it's very simple. I think it's very easy to explain to people, and I think the graphic design on them, they nailed the look of the game.
Yeah, it's a beautiful looking game. I would say that whole concept, the one that we like, where you have to get rid of your resources, a lot of casual gamers, when you explain that to them, they're like, what?
Yeah.
I have to get, because everyone likes, obviously, to collect a little pool of resources.
Yeah,
but again, if you did that in this game, everyone would have a full board of district tiles completely filled out.
Right.
That's sort of the interesting aspect of the game for us.
So guys, that is Fertility. It's from Catch Up Games. 2 to 4 players, takes about 45 minutes, in and out, very, very quick. If you guys have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. Go check this one out at Essen, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.